In Italy, two things have been happening for a very long time. The African tectonic plate has been moving north, sliding under the Eurasian plate and forming a subduction zone, a place where rock melts and rises to the surface, forming about a dozen volcanoes along the Italian coast. Vesuvius, Etna, Stromboli. These volcanoes are among the most active on Earth. One has been continuously erupting for the last 2,500 years, as far back as records go. At the same time, huge waves of people and ideas have moved through this region, millions living at the foot of these volcanoes. The Greeks, the Romans, the Catholic Church, the naturalists of the Renaissance, and eventually the first true volcanologists, each witnessing these mountains' eruptions and forming their own mythologies and theories about why they explode. Some are miles off, massive storms and oceans of fire underground, the Earth slowly turning into a star. But others are startlingly close, seemingly thousands of years ahead of their time. The people living at the foot of these volcanoes have developed new tools and methods, learning how to capture samples of volcanic gas, melt rocks in the lab, and look deep into the Earth. They've watched these mountains burn, bubble, and explode, and spent thousands of years trying to figure out why. This trip and this video were sponsored by Milanote, which I'm quite excited for because I've been using Milanote to plan out all of my videos for the past 3 years now. Milanote is a tool for organizing creative work, but I figured rather than listing off some talking points, I'll just show you how I used Milanote to plan out this video. Alright, this is the main board that I use to organize everything. It includes my notes with expandable documents for each of my sources, along with a checklist at the top for areas that I might want to research a bit further. I've also pasted in visual references I can refer to when I'm writing and editing. I've included a schedule for the trip and a checklist to keep track of my entire process. Based on my research, I then write a final script for the video, and I'll zoom this out so you can't spoil anything. No peeking. I use columns to group sections together, arrows to indicate transitions between sequences, and comments to make notes for the edit. I can even include music tracks as a reference for the tone of each sequence. Based on that script, I then put together a visual outline, basically a mood board, and they have a browser extension called Web Clipper that makes it really quick and easy to save these elements. Some are labeled with locations or notes, and I've included comments with notes about visual techniques. And on the right, I've made a shot list divided up by each location, which I can check off while we're shooting. Finally, I have a board for resources where I organize all of the assets that I might need later on, mostly archival elements that I'll use in the edit, like illustrations, photos, graphics, footage, and documents. I can easily share this entire project with a collaborator to work on it together, or just make sure we're on the same page when we show up to shoot. I'm using this as a filmmaker, but Milanote is a great tool for any creative project, and they have more than 100 templates to help you get started. It's also free, like not a free trial, just free. You can use the link in the description of this video to sign up and get cracking on your next creative project. It's thanks to sponsors like Milanote that I can go on these trips making these videos and not descend into bankruptcy in the process. So thank you again, and now let's go see some lava.
Looks so good on camera. Wow, dude.
Around 800 BC, the Greeks started colonizing Italy, and for several centuries they had a front row seat to watch countless eruptions. They incorporated the volcanoes into their mythology. Hephaestus, god of fire and metalworking, worked forges underneath the mountains, hammering the earth and spewing out fire and cinders. Many volcanoes became the home of giants imprisoned under the mountains, trying to shake free and causing eruptions, including Aeolus under the Aeolian Islands, the keeper of the winds. Around 500 BC, they started taking stabs at a more scientific view of the Earth, proposing the earliest known ideas about why volcanoes erupt. Anaxagoras proposed that strong winds circulated within the Earth, forced through narrow caverns causing friction and melting the surrounding rock. Archelaus thought winds moving through caverns caused underground storms which could escape to the surface. Pythagoras suggested a vast fire burning in the center of the Earth, and Plato envisioned an underground river of fire leaking out at the surface. The philosopher Empedocles lived in Sicily, watching Etna erupt and even spending some time living near the summit. He suggested the Earth had a molten center with material rising to the surface and causing eruptions. Pretty close. After a few centuries of Greek science, things were shifting in the Mediterranean. The Roman Empire became the dominant force, bringing new myths and new theories. Romans living in Sicily traveled to Mount Etna's crater to make offerings to the volcano's gods. The Greek god Hephaestus became Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, giving a name to the Aeolian island Volcano, and eventually the word volcano. The Roman Empire is known for its naturalists, most famously Seneca and Pliny the Elder, both writing extensively about volcanoes. Many of the Romans' ideas carried over from the Greeks, a central fire, winds in the earth, but they had some new material too. The poet Lucretius suggested the inner earth was a landscape of caves, lakes, and cliffs, with collapses and landslides causing earthquakes. He suggested eruptions were the result of the earth becoming diseased and shivering from its sickness, and that fuel for volcanoes came from ocean tides pushing air and stone into the mountain. Seneca suggested eruptions were a chemical process, the combustion of fossil fuels and flammable substances underground. The Romans formed the earliest ideas about the impact of eruptions on the climate, noticing that an eruption of Etna had created a haze blocking the sun, dropping temperatures and causing crop failures. The architect Vitruvius was the first to closely study volcanic ash, and suggested that volcanoes acted as a safety valve for the earth to release excess fire and wind built up inside. Approaching the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire was nearing its peak, with hundreds of busy towns, many of them in the Bay of Naples, the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. The mountain had been quiet for centuries, and no one really thought of it as a volcano. In fact, rich volcanic soil made the mountain's slopes a great place to live and farm. One of the earliest works of art depicting a volcano is this Roman painting of Vesuvius, depicting a peaceful mountain with cultivated green slopes. Vitruvius looked a bit closer, observing that the summit rock was similar to that on Mount Etna, and finding steam vents and hot springs on the mountain's slopes. From that evidence, he made a startling suggestion that this sleepy green mountain was actually an active volcano. In 62 AD, an earthquake shakes Naples. Shortly after, Seneca documents the mysterious poisoning of sheep on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. In 79 AD, the earthquakes return, gradually worsen, and on August 24th, the volcano erupts. Towns are destroyed, most notably Pompeii, and thousands are killed, including Pliny the Elder, who had been staying in Naples with his sister and nephew. Pliny was Roman nobility and the most regarded naturalist of the time, so his death warranted investigation. His nephew, Pliny the Younger, had survived the eruption, so the historian Tacitus asked him for a detailed play-by-play of the eruption and his uncle's death. The resulting account is the first description of an eruption with significant detail and objectivity, and has proven incredibly scientifically valuable. It describes volcanic phenomena like the eruption column, pumice and ashfall, gas emissions, lightning, and even a tsunami, all within a clear timeline. I remember learning about this eruption as a kid, about Pompeii completely buried under tephra, and the incredible artifacts preserved for thousands of years. Art, uneaten food, human fossils.
Dude, it's crazy they use straight up pumice to build this thing.
I learned about the volcano blasting huge amounts of pumice into the air, a a style of eruption now known to volcanologists as a Plinian eruption. A 150 years later, the Roman historian Cassius Dio wrote about continued activity from Vesuvius. Minor explosions every year or so, and ash darkening skies across the empire. Several centuries went by. The volcano went back to sleep, the Roman Empire fell, Pompeii and the neighboring cities were abandoned and more or less forgotten. The same happened to the Romans' writing and ideas. Scientific views of the earth were forgotten, replaced largely by those of the church. And for the church, a fire deep underground was easily explainable. Volcanoes, especially those in Italy, came to symbolize gateways to hell. Not just volcanoes, but mountains and wilderness as a whole became regarded as a place of danger and evil, further preventing any advancement in their study. At the same time, scholars in Asia and the Middle East were making scientific advances of their own and preserving the Greek and Roman studies which had faded away in Europe. Centuries later, those old Greek and Roman texts make it back to Europe, many of them basically stolen during the Crusades. They're translated for modern languages, and their ideas catch on. It's the Renaissance, and science, it's back in style. Vesuvius hadn't erupted since the end of the Roman Empire, and had turned back into a harmless green mountain surrounded by busy towns. But in the 1600s, the mountain went back into a phase of frequent eruptions. Around the same time, a large eruption of Mount Etna destroyed towns and displaced tens of thousands of people. A naturalist named Francesco di Arezzo lived nearby and saw the eruption as an opportunity, climbing to the summit to make observations of the activity. Shortly after the eruption, he studied the lava, making the first realization that lava is just melted rock. A German scholar named Athanasius Kircher traveled for the Catholic Church, including climbing and studying Italy's volcanoes. He had heard from miners that it got hotter as you descended underground, and in 1665 he drew this cross-section of the Earth demonstrating his explanation: a massive fire in the center of the planet, connected to smaller regional fires, and eventually all of the Earth's volcanoes. He also drew incredible cross-sections of the volcanoes themselves, demonstrating his theories on their internal structure, along with the first map showing the distribution of the world's volcanoes. This period saw a lot of good progress, but also plenty of bizarre new theories. René Descartes suggested that the Earth used to be a star, and that volcanoes were the result of leftover heat as it cooled. British theorist William Whiston envisioned the Earth as a cooling comet, hence the lingering heat inside. This kind of idea gained a lot of popularity, that the Earth used to be completely molten and is still cooling from the outside in, like a cookie that's still gooey on the inside. The British seismologist Robert Mallet suggested that as the Earth cooled, it was shrinking, crumpling the crust to form mountains. French physicist André-Marie Ampère suggested that the planet had cooled in onion-like layers, with chemical reactions between those layers causing eruptions. And French seismologist Alexis Perry imagined an ocean of fire within the Earth, its tides causing earthquakes, and the strongest breaking through as eruptions. But here's my favorite. In 1721, Benoit de Maillet published a radical geological theory titled the Teleomid, which is just his name spelled backwards, which is so dumb. He proposed that all heavenly bodies alternate between being stars and being planets. Volcanoes were the early flickerings of the Earth turning back into a star and would eventually engulf the planet. The Renaissance was followed by the Enlightenment, and several big things happened here. First, science just got better, with new tools, the scientific method, and a shift from speculation to observation. Second, Vesuvius started going nuts, erupting almost continuously during the 17 and 1800s and fueling rapid growth in the study of volcanoes. And third, the buried remains of Pompeii were discovered and excavated. Many of those excavating were nobility looting valuable Roman art, but eventually some started doing some actual archaeology. One did a bit of both: Sir William Hamilton. In 1764, the British government sent Hamilton to Naples as an envoy. He arrived during this period of eruptive activity at Vesuvius and quickly became captivated by the volcano, making dozens of trips to the summit, climbing into the crater, poking the lava with a stick, choking on volcanic gas. There's this wild report where he describes running miles down the mountain to escape a lava flow, trapped in a cloud of ash and falling rocks. As sketchy as his outings were, they were more scientific than any previous studies of volcanoes. He made drawings showing how the volcano rebuilt itself after an eruption. He explored the region around Naples, identifying dozens of ancient volcanic features. He collected thousands of samples, sending them back to England to be analyzed in the lab. He collected and studied artifacts from the ruins of Pompeii. He helped categorize different types of volcanic rocks and eruptions, and realized that explosions were fueled by water within the volcano. After a decade in Naples, he published a massive report of his findings, complete with dozens of beautiful illustrations, and making bold claims about the origin and role of volcanoes, many claims we now know to be true. Among his many contributions to the study of volcanoes, perhaps the most impactful is just his appreciation for them. Hamilton saw volcanoes not as some hell or monster, but as an important part of nature, writing that they should be considered as a creative rather than a destructive force. Lazzaro Spallanzani quite literally followed in Hamilton's footsteps, making even closer observations of erupting Italian volcanoes. He collected and studied samples of volcanic gas and recreated magmatic conditions in the lab, crushing, heating, and chemically treating volcanic rocks. In the 1800s, Vesuvius was still going crazy, and researchers wanted a way to continuously observe it so important changes wouldn't be missed. So in 1841, the first volcano observatory was built on its slopes. In the 1870s, Tempest Anderson visited Vesuvius and captured the first photo of an erupting volcano. He got inspired and spent decades traveling the world, capturing the first images of volcanoes. Do you remember Robert Mallet, the seismologist who thought the planet was shrinking? Well, in 1858, he drew this incredible map compiling known earthquakes and eruptions. He noticed that they followed these long lines and suggested that these were great cracks in the shrinking crust, along which rock melted and volcanoes formed, accidentally getting pretty close to tectonic plate theory. After the Enlightenment, the study of volcanoes becomes less about watching eruptions and more about making models and calculations. But the first volcanologists had laid the groundwork for the birth of seismology, geophysics, and thermodynamics. For scientists to start looking deep into the Earth and find that radioactive elements within the planet create extreme heat, that the high pressure deep underground raises the melting point of rock, keeping much of the inner Earth solid despite that extreme heat. That radioactivity drives convection currents in the Earth's mantle, which causes the plates of the crust to move, reducing pressure at their edges and allowing the rock below to melt and rise up as magma. And that gas bubbles within that magma expand as they rise, then burst at the surface, fueling explosions and building mountains. Today, these mountains are the most studied volcanoes on Earth. They continue to erupt, and millions of people continue to live in their shadows. The excavation of Pompeii is still ongoing, and several other towns remain buried and untouched. These mountains continue to stand as a testament to science, but also to history, to mythology, to the fantastical images volcanoes have inspired, even in the most scientific minds, and to the parts of our planet so strange and captivating that even after thousands of years of science, they might as well be magic.